Bruh, it would be easy to just own something and think that a government would run it. But in order to own all the prisons in the world, one would have to think of things like safety and security. In order for that, I mean, like a portfolio like that would cost you in the edges and ends of about 150 billion, and then you'd have to think of security. I'd buy something like Anduril. You see, Anduril is worth about 32, 33 million, or 33 about $1 billion, and then on paper it's about 8 billion because of all its assets around the world, like things that can't get spoken about, like atom bombs and all those things. Because the AI operated, they couldn't or wouldn't be able to speak about it in case there's a hack, in terms of what would happen when someone had to hack something like an atom bomb, because an atom bomb hacked through AI would cause it to explode on, like, maybe like America's biggest enemy, if America was paying the lease on that. So a lease on something that costs $32 billion, which is Anduril, would be around 100 million to about $300 million a month because of its expenses. But then you had to look at private armies, because obviously all those countries that it would affect would be able to pay up all that amount, which would be about, let's say, maybe about 15 countries a month that would pay about $2 million, which sounds like nothing if you look at military application. And then from that, you'd also maybe take that 2 million and, as a startup, invest into something like Meta every month, which then would be around the ballpark of about that 2 million to get about a share a month, because you'd be driving it for about, let's say, 18 months, and then after that you'd be able to sit on the board. So after you get a seat on the board, which is about $26 million, it then would generate you about two to three hundred thousand dollars a month, which would then be able to be about 3 to 4 million rand a month. That would then begin to start processing the process of having a cryptocurrency or a blockchain per a city in South Africa, which would then up the gains of the South African rand, as a portfolio like that could sustain South Africa on its own, making it a rival to countries like Switzerland, as they have security companies and security contracts around Europe in that ballpark without owning any prisons. And if you had to have access to owning a portfolio like all the prisons in the world, you'd have access to majority of the prisons in Europe, because you have to remember that all the prisons doesn't necessarily mean every single one. There are gangs and people who own private prisons themselves because they got imprisoned, so they wouldn't be able to sell until all of their friends are released. Then from that, you'd make a return of from Anduril and owning a seat at the chair at Meta every month would be around $400 million. And then expenditure on that in terms of private armies, because you'd need a share in every army that you own, with every like contract you have with Anduril, because Anduril deals with military contracts for countries. From that, you'd be allowed to build certain servers and certain quantum PCs, meaning that in terms of the meta space, in terms of the crypto space, in terms of the blockchaining and what you do in that sphere with like AI and all of those like server derived companies, you'd be able to build those type of things in every country. That's more money. That's about $1 billion a month from that. And but then in expenditure, you'd be looking at banking investments. So a company like Anduril, it wouldn't sound bizarre for it to own Nedbank, Standard Bank, Absa, and Capitec at the same time, but not as one entity, as separate entities, because all of it would be induced and introduced as security companies that run things like their separate ATMs, especially in like private zoned areas. Because if you have to think of it, if you look at where ATMs are at like petrol stations, they're always outside on the grass, a bit far from it, in case it gets blown up because of what a petrol station is. But if you think about it, all of that would amount to a certain amount a month, and it would be very, very weird for someone to think of it as one big thing, because you have to think of it as many separate things. As a security company would then run into things like buying countries, because now you look at economies that should keep safe in terms of servers and things. So countries like Qatar, countries like Bahrain, countries like Dubai. That way, if you have to look at it, a good example is that server that they're building in Abu Dhabi, or was it in Arabia somewhere, by Google or by Meta or whatever it is. It's one of the biggest AI generated servers in order to make, like, deep fakes. So famous people would be able to make themselves look better at events, as the zoning and the cameras and the satellites over the event, and the amount of wealth that would be there. Because you have to remember that wealth comes with owning things, and a lot of wealthy people own satellites. There's a lot of prisoners who are very wealthy who also own satellites. So it would be very possible to run a portfolio like that from South Africa.